If you just sort of step back a moment, I mean, you've got to acknowledge that the U.S. military operation was, extremely successful, and that the response that Iran gave was the ideal, the best that could have been hoped for. And that that the next step for best step for Donald Trump to take was to get a ceasefire, so that you can then try and move on, because there's still going to be a lot more to do. So I'm not surprised that the ceasefire didn't, immediately hold. These things often don't. It doesn't mean that it won't rumble down. What in effect happened was that Israel struck as late. I think it was, the guns didn't really fall silent until 4 a.m. And there was a big Iranian volley, with the Iranians claiming that the Israelis claiming that they killed a number of Iranian troops, Basij, they're an official militia essentially, and he killed a number of them. So what you had, Iran doing, the Israelis got a shot, off just under the wire. And now you have the Iranians responding because that shot, had lethal effects. So you may see it wind down. I would expect to see it wind down over the next days. And I think one should sort of keep a sort of broader view. These things are harder to stop than they are to start.
Well, Mark, you said that the US military action was successful. Is it fair to say that Israel has won, essentially?
Well, there's no doubt that Israel has, demonstrated absolute military superiority over Iran. The Iranian military has been humiliated. Of course, they will never acknowledge that. The rhetoric at home is going to claim victories and all that sort of thing. But there's, objectively, there's no doubt the Israelis were able to establish air superiority, to fly with impunity over the capital city, Tehran. There's no way that you can interpret that other than a humiliation. That's very different from, a defeat or inflicting surrender on the Iranians, and that's what's going to be the hard part next, because yes, these military actions were as successful as you could have hoped or expected, but that doesn't mean that the question of Iran's nuclear program is resolved. It isn't just that we don't know everything, all the details about what was destroyed at Fordo. It's also that even if everything was destroyed, the capacity to rebuild, the knowledge, the technical know-how, that all remains. If the will remains, the political will remains, or even is solidified by this experience, then this is by no means over. So the questions now are around, well, how do we, prevent this from becoming like a cyclical problem?
What about Donald Trump and all of this as well? I mean, he's been able to get in there with the announcement of the ceasefire that he brokered between these two sides as well. But can he claim this as a foreign policy victory, or is it simply too soon?
Well, he will claim it as a foreign policy victory, and in the sense that some of the claims he's making are, simply not so. He says that there'll be a forever peace now between Iran and Israel. The idea of the Islamic Republic and Israel, suddenly not fighting each other through all kinds of different means, as they have been doing for decades, is a bit ridiculous, to be honest. That isn't going to happen. And same with him saying that the nuclear program is just dealt with. It's completely obliterated. It's over. It isn't over. Nevertheless, he can claim to have done. He can claim a kind of victory. I mean, this is a really difficult problem that's eluded resolution by numerous American presidents, by the Europeans in all their diplomacy, and you can argue that he broke this in 2018 when he undid the international agreement on Iran's nuclear program that was settled under President Obama in 2015. So you can argue that he broke it, so he owns it, and it's up to him to fix it. But nevertheless, it would be biased, frankly, to look at what has happened and not say, okay, so far that's a success.